Okay, so for this video, we're going to demonstrate how to replicate one of Wayne Thiebaud's paintings using every single color except for black. So we're going to be relying a lot on complementary color mixes that we studied in our last painting project. I'm starting really quickly by sketching out my reference, just using pencil. And remember that Wayne Thiebaud has a very simplistic background, but uses color in intriguing ways to add depth to the shapes and the shadows. So I'm trying to plot it out as best I can in pencil. And like my other paintings, I'm going to start with one object at a time and sort of focus on all that range of colors. So my palette is going to get really messy, and I've put out every single color that I have in my tubes. And the first thing that I'm starting to think about are the underpainting shadows and the colors that are underneath each main color within the cupcake. So I can see in my first cupcake there is red, there's green. It's hard to see on the computer screen, but if you reference the original painting, the frosting is white, but it has other colors sort of underneath it acting as shadow. So then I start with my base color in the body of the cupcake, which is sort of like this yellow color. That's the vanilla part of the cupcake. And I'm using a variety of tiny detail brushes, both round and flat. Wayne Thiebaud is also very gestural in his painting. When he makes a mark, he just sort of leaves it. It is hard to replicate him in that sense because his sporadic brushstrokes don't really allow you a lot of room for improvising. But the goal is to sort of just understand his colors and where he lays his colors as opposed to trying to copy his painting exactly how it is. So I'm going back over the shadow and adding the main color along with a different darker blue and sort of trying to make that cupcake even more three-dimensional. The last thing I do is the frosting, sort of more of that wet on wet blending, going back in with detail brushes and cleaning things up. So you want to work gradually through the painting and obviously sort of sectioning off things at a time. This background is white, so I've left it the traditional color of the paper, but if you do have a background color in your painting, you would like to paint that first, obviously, because the cupcakes themselves have a lot of details, and those are going to be on top of the background color. So Wayne Thiebaud is of the impression that black is not necessarily a color that objects have. So when we are practicing this, you're going to be using a mixture of neutral colors to act as black. So for example, my shadow in the first one was a blue, but if I mix in orange with that blue, then I'll get a neutral color that could act as a deeper shadow. As I move on to these cupcakes, there is a brown cupcake. To get that brown, obviously we've done that before in our complementary color mixes. It's just what type of brown you need to make. Is it yellow and purple? Is it orange and blue? Red and green is more of a gray, so obviously if you needed a black, you could mix red and green together to get sort of that really dark gray. So it is a learning process to sort of not rely on black as making a shadow, but this will help your painting have more depth of color and will probably be more pleasing to look at in terms of the depth of your painting. You can see that my palette is very sporadic, and I work with just small sections of mixed color at a time. I'm not trying to overmix colors that I'm going to use throughout this entire painting because they're going to dry so quickly being that they are acrylic. So I do leave them as reference. So if I'm like, oh, I really like that color, I could try to mix another version of that right next to it. Like there's sometimes this orange that I'm like, oh, I really like that, but it's, I need to mix some more of that. So your palette, depending on how big it is or what you're using, could look as messy as mine. And I'm a very fast painter, so overall this painting took me about 45 minutes. I did take a break in between just because I chose sort of a complicated composition, meaning that it's not just one object, it's four, and they're all different varieties of color. So With the cupcakes, again, I'm always working with the shadow, then the body, then the top of the cupcake, and making sure to replicate the colors to the best of my ability. So you're going to see here that I mix a neutral color for that cupcake using blue and orange and then a little bit of red and green together. So it doesn't just have to be one mixture of neutral colors either. You could mix a whole bunch of them together and see what you get. I don't know if you guys have ever done this before, but if you mix a ton of these colors together, you are going to get pretty gross browns. But sometimes those browns are necessary. So I added the base color first to the chocolate cupcake. Then I'm going in with some red and some white, and then a little bit of just that ultramarine blue to kind of give it some depth. There are other parts of this too where you might want to let it dry. If it's dry, then you can get some more colors on top of it, using a detail brush and making sure to separate out these objects. So this painting is not meant to stress you out a lot. It's meant to give you some practice and see how Wayne Thiebaud uses color to make your paintings that much more advanced and experimental, and give some reference to how painting is different than drawing, or how these ordinary objects have these tremendous ranges of color that we might not see, just by looking at it. But as we paint it and dissect it, the colors become that much more apparent. So this should be done in your sketchbook. Trying to keep everything together as a practice, and this will be part of your final Wayne Thiebaud project, just as your sketchbook practice. All right, so here's my final product. Again, it is not exactly like Wayne Thiebaud's, but it's pretty darn close. So don't beat yourself up too much about it. Just have that nice range of color, trying to practice with somebody else's work, and it should be pretty fun and a good way to create a problem solve using a new color concept.